Hello and welcome back to Reading Past Midnight. I'm your host, Ron Rutstein. Sorry it's been a while before I've gotten some content up here on the YouTube channel, but I've got a bunch coming down the road, including a little bit about the building of the bookshelves that I did there, and a way you can do that relatively cheaply, and some unpacking and some bookstores I visited up in Canada when I was there, in Montreal and Quebec. Today I'm going to talk about two novels and kind of compare them a little bit. Zorba the Greek by Nikos Kazantzakis. This is a classic that's kind of, I think, fallen out of favor. Something that was written in 1953, or the translation was 1953. I have the original ancient as hell paperback that I read it for the first time. I kind of like reading these old little paperbacks because they have a different texture when they're this old and they've been read by other people, and it just kind of makes it a little bit more interesting as a tactile experience. And I'm going to compare it with Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldmund. One of the reasons why I'm comparing them is they deal with similar themes in a different way, but in slightly different themes. This is a story that takes place in medieval times, so the approach to the idea of an artistic life, someone who is living life to the fullest, as we might call it, versus the contemplative life or the life of the scholar. In this case, it's kind of a medieval school where the story starts and ends. Whereas the story of Zorba is a 20th century story, takes place in the early 20th century. And it's the relationship of a man who supposedly lives life to the fullest, versus a man who is more contemplative, not given to huge passions like Zorba's are. And again, the contrast between a more contemplative and possibly learned life, scholarly life in some cases, versus the man who is out there in the world and enjoying life and living life to its fullest. Let's start with Zorba. Alexei Zorba, we meet him in the very beginning of the novel, where a young man who has rented a mine with the idea of mining and turning a profit, runs across Alexei Zorba. They meet and he hires him on the spot to help him run the mine. Zorba has experience in mining and the young man obviously does not, and they're going to a small village near where the mine is. From the very beginning, the boss, as he's called, Zorba's boss, he calls him boss from the moment he hires him, is a reader, a writer, and not what we would call a man of action. He is someone who, in the case of the mine, is hiring others to do the work for him. I think that's symbolic of the boss's station in life and his own image of himself. Zorba is a man that's been married and had children and divorced and traveled all over the world and fought in wars and worked in mines. He's traveled all over the eastern part of Europe. He's lived in Russia for a while, and he brings a breadth of experience that the boss wants, but doesn't know how or is not capable of gathering that experience for himself. Zorba is constantly trying to push him into life experiences, and he's always holding back. There's no way for him to get past himself. Zorba explains that the greatest thing in life are widows, because they're horny and they like older men like himself. And he travels, when he's traveling from town to town, he will try and find a widow who is maybe a little open to his approaches, and he'll spend his time with that widow. In the novel, they are in the town where the mine is, and he falls in love. Well, he doesn't fall in love. He falls in lust with an elderly, unattractive widow named Hortense, who has been a prostitute and now runs a sort of inn for travelers. And for Zorba, this is the perfect opportunity. If you're going to read this, you have to read this in the context of its time. The character of Zorba would not survive modern editing. He is totally misogynistic. He looks down on women even though he loves them. He is at times not sure if they are human, and at times he is thinking, of course they are human. And Zorba's personality can bring on these wild swings of action. He's a musician, and when he plays, he totally throws himself into it. But if he doesn't feel like it, he's not even going to try and get himself into the mood of playing and entertaining. There is not a breadth of knowledge in the character of Zorba, but there is a huge breadth of experience. And Kazantzakis is not necessarily making judgments on the boss or the life the boss has, but he is trying to contrast the two. The man of action, the man whose lust for life is so powerful, versus the man who's perfectly content to sit and read a book. Most of us do not live in either extreme. We live probably in the middle, although I think there are more people who are trying to be and maybe succeeding in being like Zorba. There are not as many readers and writers as there used to be, even though we have this huge population now. We have a breadth of writers out there. Some of them are out experiencing life. So there's a contrast here maybe between the modern experience of the writer who has also got Zorba in his personality. Someone maybe like Norman Mailer, who is a larger-than-life kind of character. Philip Roth, perhaps, who we supposedly look down on now because of his abuses in his career. And I think that Kazantzakis is trying to say that maybe some of these people cannot be judged in the same way that we are, but I don't know if that's quite true. Zorba is the kind of man who you can see dancing through life. He loves to dance, he loves to party, he loves to drink, but he's also very good at what he does in the mines. He is sensitive to the creaking of the mines, what's going on inside, I wouldn't say the lack of safety precautions, but at that time there were very few. But he is very sensitive to the creaking of the supports that are holding up the walls of the mine while the men are inside working. He senses what's going on around him more than other people. And one of the points I think Kazantzakis is making is that a lot of us don't open ourselves up to fully experiencing what's going on around us at a given time. We don't have that we don't have that sensitivity to the place we are. However, we might see it in specific instances where a person in a certain job just understands what they're doing in that job, the nuances of it, and picks up on things that most of us would not notice. They have an expertise. Zorba has this expertise for life and everything. It's all inclusive. And Kazantzakis seems to be telling us this is a possible life that we can have. And the boss kind of wants this, but can only experience it vicariously through Zorba. And at one time, he kind of punishes Zorba because the widow Hortense wants to marry Zorba. And while Zorba is away running some errands elsewhere to get materials for the mine, she asks the boss to read a letter that Zorba wrote. And in the letter, Zorba tells the boss how he wants to marry Hortense. This is not true at all, but the boss is reading it as such to Hortense, and Hortense thinks she's going to marry. And when Zorba gets back from his trip, the boss explains that he's going to have to do something about Hortense because he's supposed to marry her. And there's a lot of soul searching going on inside of Zorba as to whether or not he should marry her, how he really feels towards her. And in the end, he decides that he will marry her because that would make her happy. And one part of Zorba that you would not expect is that he does want to make other people happy beyond himself. He tries to convince the boss to go out and have a happy life like him. Go out, throw yourself into it, enjoy it. And he decides that he will marry Hortense because this will make her happy. It's something she's never had and always wanted. And therefore, he will follow through with the plans that the boss set into motion without really caring. Zorba, in a nutshell. Excellent novel. I would give this a 5 out of 5. There's a reason why it was a classic, and it's fallen out of favor, I think, now because it's misogynistic. It's definitely a male perspective on life. And for those of you that might be interested in what it was like, or perhaps interested in what defined masculinity at a certain point in history and in a place, takes place in Crete, where the definitions of masculinity were probably a little different than they would have been had the story taken place in somewhere like New York or Paris. This novel could not have taken place in an area that was urban and modern. And I think Kazantzakis may have been hinting at something there, that by throwing ourselves into this organized urban lifestyle, we're missing something. And I don't know that I would disagree with him on that point. Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldmund is something that I read years ago, and I've read it 3 or 4 times in the course of my life so far. It's 300 pages. It's not a difficult read. It's a fascinating story. Narcissus, you'll recall the legend. Narcissus is the man who looked into the the pond, saw his own reflection, and became so enamored of his own beauty that he couldn't get away from it. The character of Narcissus is the character of the artist, like Zorba, full of life, going from village to village, creating his art, experiencing life, experiencing women, very much the way Zorba does. It's kind of dissolute life. He doesn't have a base, which Zorba eventually finds in the novel with the boss. Goldmund is his teacher, a religious man, a priest who runs a school. He starts out as a teacher and eventually becomes the master of the school. He and Narcissus bounce in and out of each other's lives, but there's a deep caring between them. Goldmund does not look down on Narcissus. I don't think he understands Narcissus's life, but he respects it. And he starts out, Narcissus comes as a student to the school as a child, and Narcissus is a young teacher when they first meet, and they form a bond that sometimes a student and a teacher can form in life. To me, that's a wonderful experience for both the student and the teacher. Okay, I'm a teacher, so I only wish that some of my students might appreciate what I impart to them, and hopefully I'm successful in doing that. So Goldmund and Narcissus become close friends. And then the time comes when Narcissus is old enough, he's had enough training in the arts to go around, travel around medieval Europe as an artist for hire. We don't know exactly what his art is because it can't really be expressed in words. I don't care what work of art you're looking at. When they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, I don't think a picture can be summed up in 1,000 words, which is why when you look at art texts, you have the picture and then you have the description, maybe the history that's taken place with the artist. Narcissus burns himself out, very much maybe in the way that Mozart burned himself out, partying. I don't want to say drugs because this is way before the drug culture, but basically feasting, enjoying life, moving around from place to place, pissing off that girl's father, falling in love with another girl briefly, and then moving on. We might look at this as a life flitting about from one thing to another with no real base. There's a grounding that Narcissus travels with, and that grounding is Goldmund. In his mind, there is always the place to go back to. He knows that he will always be welcome there, no matter what. And as the ups and downs of his life take place, he gets older, he gets more frail, he's no longer the beautiful young man that girls are going to fall in love with. He gets sick, and he realizes that his end is near. And he goes back to Mariabron, which is the school that he and Goldmund were at together. The school where he first studied with Goldmund, where we see his life beginning. I would not look at this as a typical quest novel, although one probably could. A young man that goes out, takes a journey, finds himself, and understands himself. I don't think Narcissus is put forth as a character who is seeking to understand himself. He's seeking experience. He wants to develop his art. That's more important to him probably than anything else. None of the women whom he sleeps with have a permanent place in his life. The only permanence is his art. And if you look at certain types of artists today, let's say the musician who has to travel all their life from one city to the next city to the next, this is the type of life that Narcissus is leading. And it's a difficult life because you're always on the move. You don't settle down much in one place. It's a hard life in which to raise a family. He has no intention of raising a family. Both of these novels do one thing. They force you to think about your own existence. They force you to think about what's important. And I think most of us would say that the importance is maybe our home and our family and our loved ones. And that while we may admire the great artist who spends his life traveling and making fantastic music or works of art that bring joy to people, the difficulty of having a family in that type of situation is one that most of us, I don't think, would be willing to do for the fame, the fortune, the experience. Most of us don't seek that type of life. And while we may dream of it as young people, we might want to be on stage and have thousands of people clapping at our performances. There's no real connection. There's no human connection. Both Narcissus and Zorba make that human connection with the women they meet on the way. And you might say that's the same way that a lot of popular artists do. They pick up a woman on the road, and for a while they have a companion, or for a night they're with someone. And we have to decide if that has real meaning, if that is something that is worth the trade-off, the life of constant travel, of constant new experience. Would we burn out? Is that something that we can experience in the modern world? There are occupations that do take you around, maybe not in the same sense as these. A traveling salesman, for example, might get to experience the entire country in between business stops, but doesn't take his family with him, has to leave, has to come back, and I don't know, I think I'm getting too far afield here. A lot of people will say that the novel Zorba the Greek is telling us how to live life. And I don't think he's telling us how to live life. I think he's telling us to make a conscious choice. You can choose the lifestyle of Zorba, you can choose the lifestyle of the boss. There are in-betweens, there are nuances that sometimes show up in the novel. When Zorba decides that making Hortense happy is more important than his own freedom. When the boss falls in love with a beautiful young widow and Zorba encourages him to go after her because she is clearly interested in him, but he is hesitant to do that. these are the choices that we have in our lives, and we live with the consequences. So I don't think this is just about how to live your life, because I don't think Kazantzakis would state that we should all go out and be like Zorba, be profligate, get married, get divorced, have children, run away, leave them alone, go find more experience. Hesse, if you look at his life, I think the choice of Narcissus and the choice of Goldmund are two distinct choices. And these are things that he thought of, I think, with his tendency toward Eastern philosophy and his love for Buddhism, was a real kind of crisis of personality for him. And I think he's expressing that in Narcissus and Goldmund, and possibly trying to find his way. I haven't read a biography of Hesse, but I think maybe I should. I've read a lot of Hesse's novels. I started reading Hesse in high school, and I think that as an adolescent, a lot of the novels of Hesse really drew me to Hesse's literature, and I think it still would a lot of young people today if they are exposed to it. And I'm thinking of Beyond Siddhartha, which is probably the most popular and best known of Hesse's novels, but works like Steppenwolf. Again, in Steppenwolf, you have a character who is between lives. He embraces both the Narcissus type personality and the Goldmund type personality, and fluctuates from one to another. But he has no family, nothing tying him down. And I think that one of the problems with Steppenwolf is, I had to read it first in college in a Philosophy 101 class, and I had already been familiar with some of Hesse's works at that time. And I don't think that when you're 19 or 20 years old, the novel Steppenwolf resonates. This is a novel that's about an older man who is still dealing with the issue of the intellectual life versus the more lust for life type personality. And he is not tied down by family, and he moves from one place to another in search of life, but also possibly to do his researches. Anyway, I'll do Steppenwolf in another time. If you're young, hold off reading it, or you can do what I did, is I've read it several times in my life, and I come away with something different each time. A great novel will do that, and Narcissus and Goldmund has done that for me. Zorba the Greek has done that for me. And for those of you that are into progressive rock, the group Kansas on their first album has a song called Journey from Maria Braun. Maria Braun is the school that they were out. It is indeed about the novel Narcissus and Goldmund. So if you enjoy progressive rock, go back to that first album by Kansas and listen to it. I have not seen the movie Zorba the Greek. I don't really want to, because there's just no way to contain this much in a movie. You can't do it. You could possibly do it today if you did like 20 episode miniseries type thing. This one's about 300 and some odd pages. It's worth the read. It's not a hard read, although you might find yourself getting dragged down in a couple places. I did the first time that I read it, and I kind of pushed my way through it. And read Narcissus and Goldmund as a companion novel. I think you'll enjoy the contrast between the two approaches to a similar subject. Also, two of the greatest authors of the early part of the 20th century, European. These are obviously in translation, and both of them have bodies of literature that are well worth exploring. I'd like to thank you today for joining me at Reading Past Midnight. If you like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, make a comment down below, because I will be drawing from people that make comment to do some book giveaways. As some of you might have noticed, as I have a whole new complete background, at least for now. These are bookshelves that I had built in. This is one that I had, and as I've rearranged my library, I've managed to find a whole bunch of books that I have in duplicate, and I'm willing to give some away at no cost to you if you are chosen. So put your name just make a comment down below, and if you're one of the names that's chosen at random, I'll reach out to you and offer you probably a selection of titles to choose from. Again, hit like and subscribe, please. It really helps my channel grow. Now that I'm back, you'll see more content, and I really appreciate it. You're taking the time to listen. Hermann Hesse, Nikos Kazantzakis, two of my favorite authors of 20th century literature. Thank you very much.